Yourself a little bit. Tell us about yourself.
I will. I'm Keith Wasem from Aurora, Nebraska. Born and raised in Grangeville, Idaho, and have been in Nebraska ever since being in the military.
What branch of service were you in?
I was in the United States Air Force.
Well, what were the dates that you served?
1970 to 1974.
Were you drafted or enlisted?
I was a part of the first mandatory draft lottery. My birthday was May the 3rd, and I was drawn number 40, which means it was imminent that I was going to be drafted.
Can you tell me your feelings that night when you were watching the television and you heard your number?
I think everyone was really anxious. The war had been going on for several years. It was often referred to, that is, Vietnam War, was referred to as the first televised war because almost every night we saw film from many different combat situations. We heard body counts, both on the US side, on the Vietnamese side. I had already lost a cousin to a battle in Vietnam. He was 3 years older than me, but he was killed in action in May of '69, so you do remember things like that when you know that your number is coming up.
Why did you pick the branch of service that you were drafted into?
I think the foremost thing in my mind was that I had a better opportunity to cross-train out of something that I would have been trained in the military or the Air Force that may have helped me out in civilian life, because I had never really looked at the military as being a potential career path to a point of getting out of the military. I figured it was a one-time hitch.
So how old were you when you were drafted?
I was 20, which was older than most that had gone into Vietnam at that time, by probably a couple years. So, and that kind of showed throughout the time in which I was in. There was a little higher maturity level, and to a certain extent, maybe disagreement with their having to have gone in, not in a voluntary manner, because they were drafted.
What do you recall from your first day of service?
I had signed up in Denver because I was in tech school there, and my deferment had run out. So that was certainly one reason I knew that number 40 was going to get me a ride to Southeast Asia. So I had to report back to Denver and flew to Lackland Air Force Base in Texas for basic training. One of my first thoughts was when the aircraft door opened at Lackland and I was hit with very hot, humid air, that was kind of a reality check. After that, we got several names as we progressed through the process of entering into basic training. One, we were called Rainbows because everyone was wearing their street clothing, which was of every different color possible. After we got our first haircut, which was within about 24 hours of being on base, we were known as Pings because you could rub your hand across your newly shaved head and it went ping, 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 ping. So that was some of my first memories of it.
Can you tell me about your boot camp training and experience? So what's like the most memorable thing that you remember from that time?
During basic, and I don't even know if it pertained to the training, but one thing I very much remember when we got our first issue of our military uniform, and the military is excellent about providing really classy uniforms, but our dress blues, one of the young individuals in my flight, the flight was the group that I was in during basic, became really emotional, and he leaned over to me and he said, "This is the first time in my life I've ever had a matching suit." And that meant a lot to him. I think he was from the deep south, but that was kind of a touching moment, that it was the military that gave him his first full suit of clothing that he felt proud of.
How did you get through your basic training?
You know, as I had pointed out earlier, we were slightly older than a lot of them going in, and I think we did have a slightly more mature outlook on things. Once you learned that the military wanted you to forget anything you had ever learned in life before, and you were going to relearn their method of what was going to happen, it was a fairly simple thing. My drill instructor absolutely required that after we used the restroom, we had to fold the toilet paper at a 45-degree angle under the next fold, and then roll it up so it was exactly at the halfway point. And it had to be from left to right. And we all thought that was really stupid, until we got towards the end of basic, and he knew we were gonna get through, and we knew we were gonna get past him, and somebody asked him that, said, "Why did you make us do that?" He said, "If I can't trust you to do a simple task like that, I don't want you working on my Humvee, on my tank, or on my aircraft." It made good sense.
What type of work did you perform while you were in the service? So what was your main job?
We always seemed like three choices, what you wanted to do. And it was done by aptitude score. I had scored very well, and they gave me three choices within a bracket of score points. And I had selected med technician, vet technician, and air weather observer. I got chosen for air weather observer, so after basic training, I was immediately shipped out to Chanute Air Force Base, which is south of Chicago. And during that winter, we were trained on every aspect of weather observation, weather reporting, the 27 states of sky, meaning that's all the different cloud masses you can see. We gave hourly reports, or how to report them, and at that point of graduation, we would have been ready to go out and be an observer from a tower in wherever, anywhere in the world that there was an Air Force base with a airstrip.
Before entering the military, did you have any specialized skill or training that helped you with your job? So as a weather observer, did you have anything?
Other than being technically correct and having great penmanship, the skill that I guess I took into this was my previous tech school training when I was in Denver, and that was engineering, drafting, and design. And at one point when I was stationed at Offutt, that came in very important. I didn't realize it at the time, but there were a couple of officers that had undertaken a project that required a draftsman. And they had found that through my packet, that I had previous training on that, and I accomplished what they wanted. In fact, the fellow that would have normally done that was more technically an illustrator, but he apparently got sideways with the Air Force on a drug problem, so I filled his position as a draftsman. That was later rewarded to me with a Airman of the Quarter award at Offutt.
Where were you stationed for your time in the military?
Once I got to Offutt, that was it. And that was interesting because normally that would not have been the case. But once again, I got a choice, and it worked in my favor. When I went wheels down in Offutt and got on base, They told me that I could go out to the observation tower and start the next day, or if I wanted to go into the computer room with Air Force Global Weather Central, I would have to wait a week or two until the commanding officer came in to approve that. I'd pulled KP before, so that wasn't a big deal. I waited and I got into the computer room, which turned out to be an excellent choice because I ultimately had the qualifications to be cleared as a top secret computer operator. And once they had invested that kind of time and money into my clearance, I did have orders cut twice to transfer, and I was frozen there. So that meant they had no intentions of moving me to another base.
What did your daily routine look like after you pulled KP?
Well, KP, of course, is kitchen police, and that's, sometimes it can be a form of punishment. Most of the time, it's a way to keep military personnel occupied while they're in transition or something else. One time I made pies at Chanute because I was on KP there. I've tended the chow line before. I've done a number of different things. I was in the supply room packing pallets with cigarettes and beer and stuff going over to Southeast Asia one time. So KP wasn't a big deal, but our day-to-day routine, once I was at Offutt, and I'm presuming that's, you want the permanent duty station.
Yes.
We were a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week shop. We never closed. We were in charge of forecasting the weather for all of the Air Force, and I believe we did some for the Marines too. But the main purpose of ours was satellite telemetry over the Southeast Asia war zone. There were satellites that were taking film footage of that daily, and at that time that was old technology. They would jettison the film canisters and they had to have a clear window of opportunity to pick those canisters up by an airplane in the air. So we were the ones that were in charge of making sure that that opportunity existed from a weather position. The next thing we did was unbeknownst to us at the time, we were punching out all of the flight plans for the B-52 bomb runs. So that's a lot of what our daily work was. We had a checklist every day. We'd sit at our computer console. There would usually be, we had 3 different systems we were running with computers. One was in the secret vault, one was in the top secret vault. We were running new programs. We had military officers that were usually the programmers. They were building new programs in advancement of the meteorology. We were the ones running their programs, making sure they functioned correctly, and every day. It was a real tough shift. We would work 3-day shifts and followed by 3 swing shifts. We'd get 4 days off, and then we'd start 3 midnight shifts, and then we'd get 3 more days off, and then we'd start all over. So you never really got used to a good sleep pattern. But everyone did it, and we all survived it. I don't think I would survive it well today.
How was the food?
And in my situation, being stateside, from the beginning to the end of my military involvement, I would say the food was good. There's times when some of the chow halls were really pushed hard to put out the amount of food they needed for the amount of people they fed. When I was at Chanute, the chow hall there, I think I'm pretty sure they French fried the bacon because it came as a big glob and they just broke it apart for you. But it was edible. The other chow halls, the one thing you do learn to do in the military is eat very fast. And we all did that because you have a limited amount of time. I recall one story of a friend of mine. Everyone had blue Air Force raincoats, and one looks like 1,000 others. And he always had trouble if it was a rainy day, coming into the chow hall, hanging his raincoat up and not knowing whether he was going to get it back. Because the only way it was marked was with your military letter and 4 numbers. He found a very clever way to take care of that. He had a friend that was in the base dentistry shop, and he gave him a set of false teeth, and he put them in the pocket of his raincoat. His raincoat never disappeared after that.
What were the rules you had to follow while you were at Offutt?
Offutt was SAC headquarters. We were actually a detachment off of the military airlift command as opposed to strategic air command. But that meant Offutt was very, what would I say? It had probably more officers than most bases. So you were always more cognizant of how your hair looked, how your uniform looked. You wanted to make sure you saluted, but it was a brass-heavy base. And from that standpoint, you always felt you were under a little more scrutiny. Of course, that was an important base.
What did you do in your free time?
Since I had moved off of base within, I think, 2 months of being stationed at Offutt, 3 of us had requested that we move off base for a couple reasons. One, the barracks rats, as they were usually called, those that lived in base housing, seemed to have a heavy influence of drug use. There would be raids in the barracks quite often by the military police, and they were finding drugs hidden in bedposts and things like that. The 3 of us decided that it might be better if we just moved out. We made the request, we were granted the request, and we moved to Murray, Nebraska, which is about 30 minutes south of Offutt, and lived in a little farmhouse. So my free time, and I stayed off base for the balance of the time that I was in the military, stationed there. I got to be good friends with the local farmers. They knew I was a farm kid. I did some farming. They got me involved with being a 4-H leader. I joined the Lions Club in Murray. We hunted, we fished, we trapped. We had a good time.
And played a lot of cricket.
Almost every night.
Oh my stars.
Yes, that was the game of choice, and it was unique because where we were running a checklist of various things that had to function on the computer at a given time. With cribbage, since all of your points are accumulated on a board, you could stop at most any point and know where to pick up after you did whatever task was next assigned by your checklist.
Can you describe the uniforms that you were issued?
We had 3 basic uniforms, our green fatigues, which we wore a lot. More often, we kind of used the middle set, and I believe they were called 1505s. It was a khaki. They were comfortable. The fatigues were too, really. But in the computer room, they looked a little dressier, and that was their preferred uniform there. And then, of course, our dress blues, both in a summer weight and a winter weight, which it was pretty rare that we wore those. So after finding those in the closet, that showed the least amount of wear. The ones that I must have worn a lot, because I don't have any more, are the fatigues, the OD green. We were never issued anything in the camo patterns. If we'd gone overseas to Vietnam, I'm sure we would have.
Can you describe the barracks for the 2 months that you were there? How were they? Was the conditions all right? Stuff like that.
Well, I think that was a 3 or 4 story building at Offutt. And as I recall, there was probably 2 to 4 people assigned to a room. So you had bunk beds. I believe you had 1 or 2 bathrooms per floor. So it was kind of Spartan, although if you'd have been in Vietnam, it probably would have looked excellent. So, but I have no way to compare that other than what others told me. But the barracks to me was never what I considered to be an ideal living situation. And once I moved off base and I was living like I had before. We were in a little farmhouse. I raised a garden. We had a great time there.
You had journals that you kept, and did you read through them and see how the weather was in those?
Yeah, I did. And it was typical of most any weather. I do remember coming home one time when the weather was very poor looking. It was early spring. And that was the year that Iksarben and Omaha got hit with a tornado. I had actually gotten off of a midnight shift. I slept through the whole thing. One other time I remember we had a blizzard like none other, and we worked 36 straight hours that shift that I was on because we couldn't get out, nobody else could come in. And so knowing that we had to keep things moving, we just took turns taking naps in the break room and kept running computers. But the weather was typical Nebraska weather.
Did the weather shock you from being in Idaho to Nebraska?
Only in that the amount of wind, I think, and the humidity.
What was your unit's name? Did you have like a big unit name?
Air Force Global Weather Central, AFGWC.
How did you get to Offutt?
They flew me from Chanute Air Force Base to Offutt.
And was it like an airline or was it a military plane?
I think that was a military aircraft.
How big was your unit? And then explain how it was organized.
Well, since we were a 24/7, 365 shop, we would average 4 to 6 people per top secret vault and secret vault. And so each shift would have probably 10 to 12 people on it.
Do you want to describe your A to Z job list? You said it was printed off every morning.
Yeah. Well, like I said, a lot of it we had no clue what we were printing out, but we would make cloud models, 3-dimensional cloud models. I remember seeing a number of those. We just ran through the checklist and performed what they were requesting. When the new jobs came in from the programmers, we ran those, and we really didn't know what they were trying to perfect, what they were trying to forecast, or anything else. And I guess that's the reason you're in a top secret vault.
What did you live in?
For the short time I was at Offutt, or stationed at Offutt, I lived in the barracks. And within 2 months or less, I gained permission to move out of the barracks, and I lived at Murray, Nebraska, which is south of Plattsmouth.
What was the weather like? Did you see any difference from Idaho?
Oh, from Idaho, definitely, yeah. Nebraska has much more humidity, more wind, cold temperatures, they're about the same. Little higher heat in the summer, but managed to live through that. Must be, I'm still here.
So tell me about your friends and your coworkers.
We made a lot of good friends there. The teams were relatively small. We worked together closely. We did shift work, so you covered for each other on occasions as needed. one of my closest friends, and he turned, he was actually career path then anyway. He was a tech sergeant when I was in. His name was Odell Gibson. Everyone called him Hoot. He was from Kentucky. We did a lot of things together. He helped me set up a trailer house when I bought it. We hunted birds. We ice fished together. Another one was Tom Peck, who did get out of the military after one hitch. He was from Oregon. I've stayed in touch with him with Christmas cards ever since we were in this service, so I'd like to meet up with him again, possibly this summer.
So what was your most frightening experience? I know that you weren't in combat, but...
True. I don't know if I had a truly frightening experience. We were warned at one time that there were protesters that were throwing bricks and rocks and stuff off of one of the overpasses as you come into Offutt. I don't know if that was necessarily frightening, but we were warned that that was something that could happen because Vietnam was not a very popular war.
Going off that, how did the protests affect you and your work?
Didn't have any direct impact. I always heard the stories about soldiers coming back from Vietnam and landing at their various airports, and protesters calling them baby killers and spitting on them and taunting them. So that was certainly an unpleasant thought, to think that a young 18 or 20-year-old had been asked by his country to go to war, and that's the way he was received on his return back to the U.S. Very different from what the World War II soldiers experienced, where they got ticker tape parades and warm welcomes and high fives, cheers, hugs, and all around they were the good guys because they had defeated Nazism. But Vietnam, totally different story.
Mm-hmm. Since you were drafted, how did that feel that you really didn't have a choice to serve in the Vietnam War?
Well, for myself, it probably didn't make a difference one way or the other. I felt strongly that we should have a military presence there. Our government had asked us to be there, and I probably would have served regardless of the line number that I got, which was number 40.
To lighten up the situation, what was your most interesting experience?
Oh, interesting. That's a good question. I guess the experience of the military and learning to take commands, to finish a job, be proud of a job done well. I think all of that has played into my adult life to be a better person.
Did you have any exhausting experiences?
Yeah, one night we got caught in one of the infamous Nebraska blizzards, and since we were a 24-hour shop, we never closed. And no other shifts could get in, and we couldn't get out. We worked for 36 hours straight one time, and I think the only reason we made it there because one of the team chiefs had a 4-wheel drive pickup, and he went out and picked up the entire relieving crew, and we finally got off base after 36 hours.
Do you have any exciting experiences as well?
Another good question there. I was excited when I got the Airman of the Quarter award. That was a good feeling. Somebody had recognized you for something that you had done over and above your normal day-to-day expected work routine. So that was a good feeling.
When were you awarded that?
Shortly after getting to Offutt, several officers were in need of some technical drafting, and they had researched records, found out I was a draftsman by training, so I got put on that project, completed it to their satisfaction, and they submitted my name as Airman of the Quarter recipient, and I was awarded that.
How did you travel home? Was it by plane, car, train?
My pickup, because I never left. There was almost no transition from the time that I was released and got out of the military. I was out for, I think, exactly 2 weeks, and returned back to the same chair I had vacated the previous 2 weeks, but I was a civil servant. And the reason that came about was because after the close of the war, they were de-escalating the military force so rapidly, it did threaten to take too many people out of the area I was in. So they started transferring some of us over to a civil service capacity. And so the transition was rather quick and easy.
What do you think people today should know about what you experienced, and what do they need to remember about you serving in the Air Force at Global Weather Center?
I think they need to know that every young man that does either volunteer or gets drafted and completes his military term has given something to his country or her country, because there's a lot of females in the military as well. And in doing so, I think they gain some real true world experience that will be beneficial to them for the rest of their lives. And I think the one thing I would pass on to other people, other generations, particularly young people, is a war is never a good thing. But I think it's far worse to have foreign invasion upon our own soil and lose our freedom.
How did you get promoted, if you want to explain the Air Force promotion?
Primarily through the normal promotion cycle of time in service. I know if you were probably in Vietnam and did something rather brave or courageous, there were promotion cycles that happened earlier. But I got out as an E4 sergeant, so that's pretty much where I landed.
What was the highest rank that you ever achieved?
Sergeant.
Can you give us a comparison of where that's at?
Well, it was pretty low on the food chain. I was three stripes, started out with one stripe, so yeah, I had made 3 advancements from when I had gotten into the military.
How did you stay in touch with your family while you were gone?
Mostly letters. Cell phones weren't around. Phone calls once in a while. And of all things, tape recordings. Cassette tapes were a big deal at that time, and I'd sit down and tape 60 minutes of conversation with my parents, send it to them. They would send responses back on a 60-minute tape, and we did that a lot.
Can you tell me about your commanding officers?
They were good people. And some of them, too, were drafted in. But maybe they, at that time, had a college education, so they were an officer. But they were all really good people to work with. I enjoyed working with all of them, even though earlier I had stated much of Offutt was a brass-heavy environment, but for the most part, they were good people to work with.
Can you explain brass-heavy environment?
Brass-heavy means that Offutt was, since its SAC headquarters, had a lot of officers, probably more officers than normal on a ratio to enlisted men. But since it was a strategic air command base, you would expect that.
Was it abnormal for them to be more officers than?
Typically, you're going to have far more enlisted men to officers in a given situation.
any day of the week.
So how did you guys entertain yourselves?
We did a lot of things. While we were at work, we played a lot of cribbage. Reason we played cribbage is we had a checklist of things to do from the console of our computer that we were running. And with cribbage, it's a board game where you can keep track of where you're at by pegging your points. Consequently, if you had to do one of the job cycles, you could do that and still pick up where you left off. And as long as we got our work done, nobody had any problem with us doing that. There were other card games like pitch and euchre and poker that others played, but the one that most of our team played happened to be cribbage.
What did you do for those 2 weeks that you were out of the service?
Farmed.
Okay.
I got out in the spring. I had been working for farmers, so I went right back in and began running tractor as many hours as they wanted me to run it.
And you didn't travel anywhere during those 2 weeks?
Nope, there wasn't much point in it because the turnaround time was rather quick. I knew I was going to be coming back in, and so I just stayed where I was at and let my hair grow longer and got some civilian clothing.
Do you recall any particular humorous or unusual events?
Let me think about that one. We always played a lot of tricks on each other. One time we went ice fishing, and Hoot Gibson and Walter Gosick, two of the guys that I worked with, we were ice fishing late one night, but we took an M80 with us. That's a big firecracker. And we dropped it down in a hole that wasn't being used in the ice behind Big Walt Gosick, and it blew water all over him. Didn't break the ice, but it was a good joke. So we always had fun doing that. We'd go out hunting squirrels many times in the spring. Went pheasant and grouse hunting during season. So we had some good times during our days off.
Gotcha. You said that you went to a tech school before you were drafted. Did you go to school after?
Started UNL and went for about a year.
And when's your education supported by the GI Bill?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Do you have any reunions with your old buddies, and have you attended them?
Actually, never have. I don't know whether some of them. I'm not aware that they even had any reunions out of the Air Force Global Weather Central unit.
So what was your career after, you said that you were a civil servant for 6 years?
Till I got married in '77.
Gotcha. And what was your career after that?
I started, I started school right after that and was going to UNL. And then after that, I started to work for a agricultural flow meter company for irrigation called Micrometer. And I was with them, I think, for 3 years, and then I started my own company called Easy Lawn and retired from that.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about the war or about the military in general?
Yeah, it has to a certain extent, and we've had other conflicts or wars since that time, but I always have a high regard for anyone that does serve and appreciate the fact that they are maintaining freedom for me and everyone else in our nation.
To finish it up, is there anything that you would like to add that we've not covered in this interview?
No, I just, I many times have a strong feeling that all male and actually female youth, I'm not going to say it have to be mandatory, but in some senses I think it would be good if they had 1 year mandatory military experience. I think it would be beneficial and would teach them respect, teach them sense of duty, sense of pride, love for country and flag.